Hello and welcome. Thank you all so much for joining our LRC Live Juneteenth conversation on emancipation. So today I'm joined by some really amazing activists, educators, leaders in their communities to have an amazing conversation to share a little bit more about what Juneteenth means to us, explore our own experiences with race and identity and how we're showing up for the movement for racial justice. So if you weren't aware, Juneteenth celebrates the ending of slavery in the United States on June 19th, 1865. So this date marks when Union soldiers arrived in Texas to share the news of freedom from enslavement. But this was actually 2 years after the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation. And so today, on June 19th, we get to honor those that were freed from enslavement, reflect on how far we've come and how far we have to go as well, and where we find ourselves in that journey towards liberation. So, really excited to dive into the conversation. And with an LRC Live, you basically get to be a fly on the wall to what it looks like and sounds like to participate in a living room conversation. And a living room conversation is a really simple way to connect across divides, be it politics, age, race, gender, nationality, and more, to bring us together to have meaningful conversation where we get to respect, relate, and connect. And typically, our conversations are about 90 minutes long between 4 and 7 people. But today, we're going to have an abbreviated 60-minute conversation so that you just kind of like get a little taste, a little sample, and hopefully, it inspires you to want to have your own conversation. So, some of the questions that we're going to be diving into today is from a PDF that you will have access to so that you can explore these same questions. And each of these questions is pulled from our number of conversation guides that we have available to support you talking about race in your communities. So we've pulled some of our favorite questions and put them all together in a PDF of 10 questions to help you explore some of these concepts with your own communities, be it in your family, your book club, your organizations, and wherever you feel called to show up in this conversation. So we'll start off, I'll share a little bit more about the people that we're going to be in conversation with today. And I'm so grateful for the folks joining me. I'm kind of pulling from a number of the different connections that I have. So I'm joined by some friends in the wellness and yoga community because I myself, while I am the racial equity partner here at Living Room Conversations, I'm also a holistic health coach and yoga instructor. So I'm joined by two friends who also did the same training as me and are in the same yoga community. So we have Juanita, who is a 500-hour registered yoga teacher, holistic wellness advocate, and the creatrix of the wellness brand, The Carmel Yogi. And we have Rebecca Watson, who's a yoga teacher based in LA. And for the past several years has been really passionate about calling to address the lack of representation of Black women in mainstream wellness industry. And so really uplifting that through being an ambassador of the Black Girl Yoga in California. And, she frequently just shows up really powerfully in this space to make these tools accessible to our community. Then we have a fellow colleague, friend who I'm connected to through Eastern Michigan University, Dar Mayweather, who is the creator and founder of doingthegoodwork.com. And he helps his clients confidently engage in critical conversations around diversity and inclusion. So we were connected through our diversity group on campus when I was working in the volunteer center at EMU. And then we have Chanel Curry, who is the founder and CEO of Media Done Responsibly, a media and digital literacy organization that works to amplify humanity-centered and socially responsible media. She's also a wonderful partner with Living Room Conversations, who's creating some powerful conversation guides for us at Living Room Conversations, including a guide to help Black men and Black women process the murder of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and a number of others last summer. So incredibly grateful to be joined by all of these powerful leaders today. We'll go ahead and kick things off as we always do in Living Room Conversations, and that is with our conversation agreements. And so our conversation agreements are really kind of the backbone of a living room conversation. It is how we engage in really respectful conversations. And so as I'm sharing these, I want you to listen for what of these come naturally to you, which of these might be maybe a little bit challenging at times, and where you hear yourself in the agreements. And so I'm going to get us started with the agreements, and then we'll go to Chanel, Dar, Rebecca, and Juanita. And our conversation agreements, the first one we have, be curious and listen to understand. Conversation is as much about listening as it is about talking. You might enjoy exploring how others' experiences have shaped their values and perspectives.
And I will unmute myself. Thank you so much. So the second agreement is show respect and suspend judgment. People tend to judge one another. Setting judgment aside opens you up to learning from others and makes them feel respected and appreciated. Try to truly listen without interruption or crosstalk.
Excellent. And I'm gonna go with note any common ground as well as any differences. Look for areas of agreement or shared values that may arise, and take interest in the differing beliefs and opinions of others, which is super important if we're going to be having conversations about something as critical as this.
Passing it to Rebecca.
Thank you. Our next agreement is be authentic and welcome that from others. Share what's important to you, speak from your experience, be considerate of others who are doing the same.
So the next one is be purposeful and to the point. Do your best to keep your comments concise and relevant to the question you are answering. Be conscious of sharing airtime with other participants.
And lastly, own and guide the conversation. Take responsibility for the quality of your participation in the conversation as a whole. Be proactive in getting yourself and others back on track if needed. Use an agreed upon signal like the timeout sign, or one I like to use is the wrap it up, if you feel the agreements are not being honored. So I wanted to just take a moment to digest those and consider what it's like to be a part of a conversation where these kind of agreements are honored, and what it means to really show up and value these different agreements. And again, noting where it's a little bit challenging for you when you hear these different agreements, the ones that you have a bit more difficulty embodying, and which ones you're really committed to showing up to today. So now we have the opportunity to get to know each of the folks participating in this conversation a bit more. Gotta hydrate. So I'm gonna ask each of you to answer one of the following questions so that we can get to know you a little bit better. What sense of purpose, mission, or duty guides you in your life? Or what experiences or events led you to the work that you're doing right now? And I'll let folks hop in wherever they feel called to. And if you need a little bit of inspiration, I'll call on you. Dar, would you like to kick us off?
I would, but I gotta go ladies first. I have
Okay.
to say it. I think that's just important for me to do.
Okay.
I was ready
Chanel,
to
would you like to
unmute.
hop? Perfect. Go ahead, hop
Yeah.
in.
I was just moving slow. So I like to answer the second question, which what experience or events led you to the work I'm doing right now? So as Brielle mentioned, I'm a yoga instructor, holistic wellness coach, and all those good things, and a creatrix behind my personal brand, The Caramel Yogi. And this all started when I was younger. I couldn't sleep at night, so my mom brought me to yoga classes. And it was just something about having that space held for me at that time and being able to really calm down after school and everything. It just sat with me different. And I knew I wanted to extend that out to first my peers and now my community. And as things like happened throughout my life, I was in Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. And even now, as I'm transitioning out of my partnership, it's just a way for me to hold space for myself. And I see the impact it has on others when I'm able to hold that same space for them. So I'm excited to be a part of the conversation and almost nurturing this community that we're creating in this moment.
Okay, now I'll jump in. Okay. I'll go with what sense of purpose, mission, and duty guides your life. And so for me, racial justice education is my ministry. It has been passed down to me by, I believe, elders who have been doing this work for 40, 50 years. And I do it for profit. And I think that is necessary for me to say, because we oftentimes believe that uh, people who've been oppressed by, these 400, 500 years of society, right, should do this work for free, when all these companies profited off of the oppression of Black people, off the enslavement of Black people, and then Black people are supposed to come in and fix it for free. That doesn't make sense to me. And so I make sure that I say that, because that's important. And then I think also I'm convicted. And when I first started speaking, because I'm also a speaker, coach, consultant, went into a school, and a young man came to me and talked about how he was microaggressed in the classroom and nobody did anything. And these are master's level, bachelor level professionals, teachers who we are entrusting with our children to promote them into being civil members of society. Yet they have to overcome and the fears, they have to be so courageous to walk into a classroom that they've been microaggressed and nobody noticed that. And so I feel like it's my job to be able to tell these stories, to talk about how these communities are ignoring the problems that our children are facing, because I have a 6-year-old and it's my duty to make the world better for him. And so that's part of my conviction.
Thank you, Dar. I'm going to follow what you said. You said this is your ministry. I was very much in your amen corner just now. So thank you. Again, I am Chanel Curry. I am going to answer what experiences or events led you to the work you're doing right now. And it's actually kind of a blend of my sense of purpose as well. But like many people here on this conversation, I do diversity, equity, and inclusion and justice work as well. And I am a professor. I teach TV, film, and media studies and journalism and Pan-African studies at California State University, Los Angeles. And then with my nonprofit, I do work around making sure that the ways in which we're represented in the media reflect the true reality of who we are and our humanness. And so I too feel this really deep call to make sure that the work of and the lives and experiences of Black folk are represented in ways that reflect the fullness of our humanity. And even, after the founding of this country and after, as you mentioned, 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, slaves just finding out, or enslaved people just finding out about their freedom from chattel slavery, there still was so much ongoing work to be done. And that work continues, even though some of it may not, some of it is still physical when we're looking at the prison industrial system and complex. But a lot of it this day is psychological, and it's based in education and how well people have the tools and the resources and the information that they need to be anti-racist practitioners and to dismantle systemic racism. So thank you. I'm happy that you've created this space.
And I would like to speak to what sense of purpose or mission directs me in my work. And so my name is Rebecca Watson. I'm based here in Los Angeles, California. And I am a holistic health coach, as well as yoga teacher, and more increasingly trainer in yoga settings. So for me, we have this word in yoga called dharma, and this word also exists in Buddhist tradition, but it's a little bit different in yogic traditions. However, the word can mean the path, it can also mean the teachings or purpose. And so one of my earliest teachers, her name is Shiva Ray, and one of my second earliest teachers, his name is Dharma Mitra. And in one of my first trainings with Shiva, she gave us this task to consider what our dharma was. And at the time, I was unable to answer that. I was just like, I like yoga, I like doing it, that's why I'm here. But it was to go a little deeper and like, what is the purpose in why I'm doing this practice, and what, am I hoping to bring forth to others through the work and through sharing and all this. So fast forward a few years later, I met Dharma, who his name is Dharma, but it also means purpose. And his last name is Mitra, which means friend to all. So his purpose as a teacher is to show up and to be a friend to all. And so I was like, oh, that's good. I like that. I'm like, not my purpose, not my path, but it was still like planting the seeds to what, more authentically was my Svadharma, or my self-purpose. So fast forward, just in dealing with places as a woman of color who does yoga, as a Black woman of, the African diaspora in America who does yoga, oftentimes we're not so prevalent in the rooms, right? Depending on where you are in the world, or depending on who your targeted, class looks like, there's not that many Black women, and that's changing. And we've always been in the practice, but we haven't been who you see doing the practice, and all that's changing. So my Svadharma, or my self-purpose in my teachings and my practice, is to show up whole and healed and liberated. And it's still a work in progress, but when I take on that power, knowing that I have the power to heal myself, I have the power to liberate myself and to share what I know with others so that they might heal themselves and they might liberate themselves, that's how I show up. So I'll say that for now.
Thank you all so much. You all can start to get a sense of the power we have in the room with us. And so for myself, I'll speak to the question of what experiences or events led you to the work you're doing right now, and specifically to the work around racial justice. So in high school, I was, straight A student, honor roll student, and towards the end in my senior year, I got into a fight, and I hit someone for the first time ever. And it was my first time ever going to the principal's office, like ever being in trouble in school. And I was suspended that day, but that suspension led to being criminalized and being charged with assault and battery. And not only was I charged, but I was tried as an adult at 17. And I was also denied a public offender. And so I was a young 17-year-old Black girl navigating this system in a predominantly white rural area where I was the only Black person in a K-12 school, and where I was with my white family who didn't talk to me about race. And so I didn't feel prepared, or, I felt pretty clueless going through this situation until years later, going to college and being like, oh, this isn't just something that happened to me. This is happening to Black children all over the country. And, being tried and charged as an adult, or at 17 and getting those charges, you know, I was kicked out of the University of Michigan, where I was already enrolled and had my class schedule picked out and my housing secured. They revoked my admission because I was put on probation. And it just led to me really seeing like, wow, look at the way I'm being treated compared to all of my white peers who get in fights all the time. This is my first time ever being in trouble in school. And I, look at the stark difference in how I'm being treated. And it really opened my eyes to the reality of racism being alive and well in America, in our systems. And so it was a big awakening for me, and going to college and learning more, it, led me to get more involved and to support. And so that is really what led me to being involved around things with racial justice as a biracial Black woman who knows that conversations about race really could have made a difference in my community and me feeling supported in that process. So I share that because, for those of you that are listening, when you're having your own conversation, when you share and you lead out in vulnerability, it can really change the quality of your conversation. And so I encourage you, if you do have these conversations in your community, just go there and really share what's been weighing on you and what really brings you to the conversation. So now that we have heard a little bit more about folks, we get to dive into the questions here. And so as I shared, there are 10 questions that we've pulled from around our conversation guides about race, and one thrown in there about Juneteenth. And so you can take a look at the PDF as you're listening to this and see what questions really speak to you. And I've had our participants already pick out their favorite question that they wanted to speak to today. And so I will let Chanel lead us out, followed by Dar, and then Rebecca and Juanita, and I'll close this out.
Outstanding. First, Brielle, thank you so much for that powerful sharing. That like you said, that vulnerability, it just really struck in the heart. And it is very much so the reality of young Black girls. One of the things I do is I have a film festival, and we had a film strictly about that, that talked about that. So you're not the only one, and unfortunately it's still happening. So thank you for educating people on your very personal experience. So the question that I selected was, what does Juneteenth mean to me, and how do I celebrate it? And I actually want to start off by reading General Order number 3 from 1865. And this was the order that Major General Gordon Granger proclaimed in Galveston, Texas. And I know you gave us some background on that, Brielle, a little bit earlier, but came in with about 2,000 Union troops, many of whom were African, were Black people, and came in on the 18th, and then went to the headquarters of the Confederacy and spoke these words, and went around Texas also and spoke these words. So the people of Texas are informed that in accordance with the proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that between employer and hired labor. The freedmen are advised to remain quietly at their present homes and work for wages. I just need to repeat that. The freedmen are advised to remain quietly at their present homes and work for wages. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect, meaning to gather, to collect at military posts, and that they will not be supported in idleness, either there or elsewhere. I just think it's really interesting that, you're free, but these are the very specific limitations of your freedom that are being spoken right after. And of course, Black folk were like, I'm free, I'm out, I'm not sitting here quietly, and right, okay? And being the, nice quote unquote, or whatever, the respectability of staying in my place. But they were met with lynchings, they were met with shootings, being murdered, all manner of trauma. And so even as we celebrate the freedom and the recognition of our freedom from chattel slavery, there's still very many levels that we are not free. And there are concerted efforts, even like in that order, there are very concerted efforts that you have freedom within a specific range that we give to you, and we're telling you, you're still not fully human. You do not have the authority to govern yourself. But within these parameters, you can walk freely, right? And so we see things like Jim Crow and the new Jim Crow and years of the prison industrial system, and great film by Ava called 13th, talking about the 13th Amendment and how the loophole in that is that you're free unless you're a criminal and imprisoned, and then we can still treat you like a slave. And, health disparities, what we're looking at right now is the legalization, of voter suppression. We're looking at the legalization of also censoring Black studies, right? We're gonna legalize this idea of censoring true information to get to the community and to get to people. And so for me, this is both a celebration of, the accomplishment of making it through, that physical enslavement, but also it is a call to action that we are not completely free. There is much work that is here for us to be done. One of the things that I constantly tell my students when they get discouraged and they look at 400 years, what are we supposed to do in this time frame? And I tell them two things. One, we have to look at this like a marathon. In a marathon, you pass the baton. And whoever has that baton, they run their heart out until they get to the next person, and that next person takes it on and they run their heart out. You don't look around and sit down and say, wow, well, the folks before me didn't win it. What am I going to do? And sit down? Because I promise you, people who are engaged in the work of white supremacy, they are running their heart out. They are putting in place all kinds of barriers to keep this freedom from happening. And so we have to continue that work. The other analogy I use is it's like brushing your teeth. You don't brush your teeth on Monday and expect to have fresh breath all week, right? You just don't. This is a daily practice. This is something that is ongoing. And so in the same way, the work that we do for our liberation of our minds, of our bodies, of our space in the world, and this dismantling of a hierarchy of oppression, that is something that is ongoing. And so for me, Juneteenth is both a reminder of that and a celebration of our victory and continued victory.
Wow. Like, how do I even go, like, okay. So the education has been done. Okay. This is, I don't, no history needs to be given from me. I think I'll come from a personal perspective. And so to be totally honest, how I got into equity work was volunteering to teach a diversity course to RAs as a hall director in 2010. And as I was doing the work with them, I recognized that I wasn't doing the work that I was actually given to teach these folks, right? So I did the homework with them. And I'll be honest in saying, like, I come from public school systems that did not acknowledge Juneteenth, did not acknowledge MLK, did not acknowledge Black History Month. And these are public school systems where I went to majority Black schools. But of course, having majority Black students is very different than having majority Black teachers and administration. And when you take that out of the community, you take the history, or when you only isolate, Black administrators, Black teachers to certain schools, or they don't get paid well in public schools, so they go to private schools, and that education, that history goes with them. And so it really wasn't until I was graduate from college that I started recognizing, I'm like, wait, like learning more about the history of Black folks, learning and understanding how everything is symbolic for us. You know, oh yeah, we are free under the law, but in society, we're not free. They don't treat us the same. They don't want us to have anything. And then, you know, kind of what, you know, Blackish, I love their June 19th, you know, episode, really did a really good job of highlighting that you free them and then what? Like, it shows that the federal government still will not care for our safety. And then the increasing of lynching because Black folks couldn't be owned. So you are no longer our property, so we don't need you. And then the reinforcement of that by the country not doing anything. But I choose a more lighter way to celebrate because me and my wife actually got married on June 19th. And you know, God works in mysterious ways. We knew that we wanted to have our grandparents there. And so we actually got married in Michigan, but had a ceremony in Vegas. And so, you know, it was really important for our grandparents who, you know, few of them have actually passed now, was able to see us celebrate, and it was June 19th. And so for us, it's important to break bread and have a great meal. You know, it's important for us to laugh and joke and be merry. It's important for us to, you know, to celebrate, of course, our successes of making it here, but also commemorate the ancestors that's got us here, right? Like, our gene pool has to be so strong to make it through 400 years of oppression for my son to be able to go to wherever school he wants to, for him to live in a home that's brand newly built, right? Like, those are the passage of the, you know, the quotes that my grandma, you know, showed me is, you know, thinking like, yeah, it's just so much. It's so much. But I want to make sure I pass it on because it's just really important for us to just so that not just it's the hurt and pain, but it's also the celebration as well.
Greetings, Dar. Thank you for sharing that. I think celebration as a concept leads me into, you know, what I was going to share. And my question that I'm responding towards is, where do you see yourself within the context of the racial justice movement, and what does that mean to you? And so for me, you know, within the movement, so many times there's an inciting incident which happens and we're angry, we're upset, we're sad, we're charged, and we're in the streets and we're protesting. And, you know, some people who might not know better will call it a riot, and it's not a riot, of course, but it's, you know, an uprising for us to show up and to let the systems at large and the people who are running those systems know that, like, shit's not okay, okay? Pardon my language, I'm not an academic, but yeah, so, you know, when something happens and we're you know, we're charged up and we don't know what to do, we don't have the tools, but we need to just let our agony of what we're enduring be heard, right? So a lot of times that's how these movements are perceived, and people who might be further away from the movements, or maybe they're not in the town or the city or, you know, the place where the violence is happening, they look at that and it just seems very foreign, or it seems like, oh, that's a big city problem. That's not a me in the middle of America problem. You know, so there's this removal from seeing like protests and seeing people gathering in the streets that, you know, if somebody's just living their life with little incident, there's this disconnect, right? So for what I do is, you know, teach yoga. I show up in a lot of circles where these are people who have good intentions and they mean well, but oftentimes they can be dismissive of the pain and the reaction of, you know, protest gathering, because they can say, okay, well, that's not really helping anything, or, you know, we should show up in a nonviolent fashion, which, you know, nonviolence has its tenets in protests. but also there's violence sometimes too. So, as a healer and as a wellness practitioner, I think showing up in a way that gives people an alternative to protesting in the street, but also lets people know that, okay, we're here and we wish to be heard and we wish to still practice actions that can help liberate us as a people and as, on the margins of certain society. It doesn't have to be this big violent thing, but it might be. But it also doesn't have to be nonviolent, kumbaya, we're not going to acknowledge any problems, right? So there's this balance. And I think my work is contributing to that balance and helping to, finesse and amplify that balance. So in that way, I'll speak of a few programs that I know of in LA. And if you're elsewhere in the world, it might be up to you to start that program or just see if that's going on already in your area. But in LA, there's an organization called Walk Good LA, and they were founded last year in June, and we actually just had our 1-year anniversary this past weekend. But it was founded as a form of protest, but from a healthy mindset. So we do a 5K during the week and we do a yoga class that's weekly every Sunday. And it just started off as, a few friends getting together, and it grew to now where there's like usually around 200 people in this yoga class every Sunday. And as someone who is doing racial justice work, it's very easy to encounter burnout. It's very easy to become more radicalized or more violent in your thinkings because, a lot is going on, and how do I process it? How do I handle it if I don't have the healthiest tools and mechanisms? Maybe I'm just angry all the time. So when we host these spaces, like, okay, let's get together, run a 5K, doesn't matter if you're very slow, just come out and move and breathe. And with the yoga practice and with the running, it brings you into your body, even if you're not someone who would go to a yoga class without it being led by other brown folks. We're just giving people alternatives to, being go, go, go in the protest, when you are at a risk of just burning yourself out. I'm tripping over a few words, but, what I want to say is that it's critical that you are contributing to your own self-care when you're in spaces to show up and do the work of liberation. We can declare ourselves free and still be, oppressed by the systems and not be, doing our best to really amplify and grow that freedom and atone for any number of years where we were in oppressed systems and we didn't know any better, So showing up, taking care of myself, and letting those teachings be an alternative, but also a supplement to the action of showing up in protest, in an uprising type of format. So I'll just
Thank
say,
you.
yeah, thank you. I know I'm rambling. Just racial justice is so vast. It's so vast. And I say that not for us to feel overwhelmed, but for us to know that it can look like the work of healing and, rectifying for past harm. It can look so many different ways. So maybe it's you finding a yoga class and inviting people of color to come to that yoga class. And maybe it looks like, the legislative aspect. Maybe it looks like you're in the street, so just know that there are different ways that you can show up within racial justice. And if you're feeling like, oh, whatever I'm doing is too small, like, don't feel like that, do something and make sure that you're taking care of yourself along the way.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to hop in because I want to speak to that question also of where do I see myself within the context of the racial justice movement and what does that mean to me? I remember being in college and Black Lives Matter really, being prominent on the scene with the murder of Mike Brown and getting involved in campus, but also feeling like, where is my place? Like, where am I going to be most effective in showing up for racial justice? And, I would go to protests and I would be so drained after. I would cry so much. And like, I would just not be in a space where I felt like, it was a good release to like be present to like, this is happening in our community. But I also felt like, okay, I don't know if this is where I'm supposed to fit in. And I got involved with Black Lives Matter Detroit, not for very long, but I went to one of their events in Detroit and they had a healing circle. It was a community healing circle. And we went to this beautiful like community garden and there was beautiful art like painted on the fence, like coming in. And we got there and they're like, take your shoes off, put your bare feet to the soil. And there's this, this elder woman who was like speaking so powerfully, and she was like, I brought this aloe plant for the altar to represent on the outside our activists in this generation. They got that toughness that's ready to come up and like fight for liberation, but on the inside y'all got this healing goo. And I was like, I love her, I want to be like her when I grow up. And I felt like this is my place in the movement, to bring people together, to put their feet on the earth, to bring the people to the water, and like to heal and come together. And so that's where I found my place, was in supporting people healing. And whether that is through yoga and breath work or plant-based nutrition and, nourishing ourselves well so that we can be sustained in the work that we're doing, and like showing up in our power and in our purpose for as long as we can, because we're taking such good care of our holistic health. Like, we need y'all, like healthy, whole, healing, and powerful in what you're doing. And so sharing some tools and modalities that support people, and like what Rebecca was saying, trying to prevent burnout, and really being able to know that our self-care and our community healing supports collective liberation and our movements being sustainable. So that's definitely where I see myself in this movement, and it means the world to me, and it feels good in my spirit. Because when I was going to college and doing my degree in social work, I felt burnt out before I even graduated. And when I started to make this shift towards like healing justice and wellness, I was like, I know this is doing important work to serve the collective and to bring like liberation. And it feels really good in my spirit. It brings me some joy, and being able to keep that like joy and heart in my work. And I know that that will sustain me in this as well.
Yeah, I want to invite Juanita in, but I have some things to say. So I'm gonna hold, but I want to invite Juanita as well.
Perfect. Let's hear from Juanita, and then we will be able to get some crosstalk in. So make note of what you want to share.
I'm trying to remember everything I want to say, but this is almost kind of connecting all of you guys together, especially with Rebecca's question. But the question I was going to answer, or how have recent events opened your mind to a perspective you haven't considered before, and how I challenge myself to stay open, continue to learn. So as I mentioned earlier, like I'm in the yoga industry, same thing with the wellness. I'm trying to be a good representative and like call people in, especially I used to work at a university, and I was like their first yoga teacher ever. I was their first Black yoga teacher. I was their first Latina yoga teacher. So I carry like a very heavy seat of the teacher. I really want to show up and show them what it is to just try something new, learn about healing modalities. Like I'm even mentoring some people who took classes with me and now want to become yoga teachers. And there's such a ripple effect. And I think when we talk about social justice and things, you always want to show up. Like I feel like everyone wants to be on the front end at the protest, like having that power kind of echoing in your community. And I live in North Carolina, and in the particular place I live in North Carolina, we don't have any protests. We don't go out like that. It's just not safe for me. So I'm like, what do I do? Like I'm home, like what can I? And that's where like this first question come in, like the perspective of if you're not the front person, you don't have the sign, you're not out there, what do you do? We kind of feel like a helpless. Like I personally felt helpless because I'm like, okay, I can sign the petitions, I can donate, but I just felt like I wanted something. And with like Rebecca's question, my role in everything that I do is support. I am holding that community. I think it's important that when we do have these radical acts, we have radical rest as well. And I even learned that with my relationship, he didn't understand who I was as a person at the end of the day. I think I was wanted, but I wasn't valued. So when it did kind of turn it into this abusive situation, I had to realize like, okay, I can't be this like rah, I'm gonna end it. I was just like, I need to support myself. I need to be support for my community. And the only way to do that is to reclaim my joy, reclaim my rest. And whenever I moved myself from that situation, it was kind of this breath of fresh air. Because you have to know what is like, not as what's meant for you, but you need to know where you can thrive. You don't want to just like survive somewhere or force yourself to be in a position. It's okay to be the support. It's okay to be like this silent, like angel carrying, whatever you need to fit into, finding a space that makes you feel the most almost at peace. I had to create a space for myself in my own form of protest. So whether that was, leaving my partner or making a yoga like community for my people, we just found a way to get together. So it's all working out for the best. And now we get to open the floor, Brielle.
Yes. So if there was anything that someone shared that you want to follow up on, have a comment, make a question, just kind of open the floor for a few minutes for some crosstalk for what came up for folks.
I love what I'm hearing on finding your own space, finding peace for you in that space, because being Black is an act of resistance. And how we show up all the time is always challenging status quo. Doesn't matter how safe or not safe, right? Doesn't matter if my pants sagging or not, I'm still either a threat or seen as the statistic for all of these organizations that I operate in, that many of the folks who look like me operate in. And I think it's also one of the things I want to say is that it's room for all of us to find and create that space or find some kind of community to be able to do this work, with. I think showing up to the protests is good, and it's almost easier than going into the boardroom and having a conversation with a person who has been raised to think you should be oppressed. like having those type of hard conversations, to me, shows a level of healing when you can be relational with somebody who opposes your existence. We talk about Martin Luther King as if he was this fluff person who was just talking safety and nonviolence, at the same time being persecuted by white people, get stabbed by a Black woman, and still chose love, and not just love, but like he talks about in his teachings agape love, and how that is a godlike love, deeper. And he talks about how I don't have to like my oppressor, but since I am a man of God, I do choose to love even when they don't love me back. And that's, to me, a level of healing where we know in order for things to change for Black people, there must be bloodshed. And so who's putting themselves on the line for our community? And oftentimes it's sad and scary, and it feels like too much to do that. And so this is what I hear these beautiful women saying is, you don't actually have to put your life on the line when you find your community, right? When you don't have to wake up feeling like an imposter. You don't have to wake up feeling like role strain, right? Where you have to be everything for everybody. You don't have to show up like that when you find the community that works for you, when you're talking about racial justice, right? And when it feels like you are role strain, when you're feeling like an imposter, that's not the right community. And that's a sign of that, right? Because I laugh and joke with my people when I'm talking about racism. I laugh and have fun when I go to NCORE and we're, all these brown people, at National Conference on Race and Ethnicity, definitely go. And all these Black folks are talking about critical race theory, who they're trying to get rid of. And we're engaging in deeper level of discussion with joy, right? Like, that's the work. And even for the white people who might be watching this, right? Like, it's hard for you to probably go into these communities of color and talk about racial justice. And so where do you start? With your community, right? Like, that's easier, okay? Like, and it's about proximity. And so you don't have to go into your legislator. Why don't you go into your cousin, to your niece or nephew, to your grandma, and say, hey, let's have a conversation? Because that's easier, but it still creates change, and it creates a ripple that you might not might not expect.
All right, all right, all right. Dar's at the pulpit again. I'm like, what? Go ahead. I love it. I love it. Thank you so much. Like everything that everyone's saying is so powerful, from Rebecca to Juanita to Dar. There were a couple of things. I'm down here writing notes because, you know, that helps me to be able to have the pinpoint. Yes, I wanted to say that the things that you all are saying are so powerful. Dar, you just spoke about being relational with someone who opposes your existence. Like, wow. I mean, that I feel like that requires therapy after, you know what I'm saying? Just because being relational with someone who opposes your very existence, that's really powerful. And to be expected to do that and to educate them and to do that from a space of your point of power. And one of the things that I talk about all the time is very much when we're talking about racism and this challenge of racism, especially in the country that we're in, where I spoke earlier about the censorship, this legalized censorship of having the conversation. But there is a denial and there is a privilege in that denial, and there is there's like a purposeful denial. But what ends up happening is it's like we walk around with a knife in our chest and we have to pretend like it's not there. So we have to, you know, have conversations like, you know, socialize and talk to people as if, you know, oh, the sun is shining, it's such a beautiful day, never mind this knife that is stuck in my chest. And so, and then people don't speak to it or address it, you know, because they feel more comfortable not addressing the knife that is still in your chest. But if somebody brushes against it, you know, with microaggressions or whatever, that's deeper pain because this knife is now jabbed further into you. And so part of the work of what we're doing is removing that from our chest. And that is painful work. And it means that we have to acknowledge the pain. And also it requires that we are valued. Juanita said, wanted but not valued. And I know you were talking about your partnership and love relationship. And I was like, wow, let me get my pen, let me get my notebook, I need to write this down. It is that in relation, but also when we're talking about going into these spaces, and very often, and Brielle, I just say kudos to you for creating the space and speaking up and saying this is needed. Very often in predominantly white spaces, I feel like we're wanted but not valued, right? And when I say that, I'm saying it's like, I want to learn about racism and anti-racist practices, but I am not willing to pay you and invest in it in order to get the proper training that is required. I'm going to read a book, I'm going to create a book club, and not to hate on that, but I'm not willing to listen to you to do the deeper internal work of dismantling what is inside of me, dismantling and envisioning and recreating the systems that form the foundation of our agency. And so I just want to say to you, go ahead, do your thing. You know what I'm saying? Because it is necessary for you to say, as a Black woman, pay me for what I'm doing and the value that I'm giving to you, right? And not only that, but let's not just do lip service to this. Let's find those Black and Brown led agencies. And when we partner with them, let's invest dollars into the work that they're doing. Let us raise awareness in the community about the work that they're doing. Let's not just recreate it ourselves so that we can get more Black folks' eyeballs on the screen, but let's support those agencies that are already doing the work. I have a t-shirt that says, trust Black women. And, you know, and that is part of this process of being able to be in these leadership roles, not just being wanted, but being valued and being valued. Put your money where your mouth is in terms of that, and invest in this so that we can do that deeper level work. So I'm done. I'm sure that was over 2 minutes, but thank you.
Thank you. Can I'm going to jump in after that just because it's very real that if you're in community with people who are maybe don't reflect all of the intersections that you grew up with. Maybe you grew up around mostly white folks and you're a brown person. Maybe you grew up around all white folks and you're a white person. So you're not maybe used to interacting with Black people or African-American people or whatever in your area, the folks around you want to be called. It's important that you don't thrust the burden of education onto your new Black friends, right? So again, with it being wanted, not valued, a lot of times as teachers and, you know, people who are on social media platforms, it's like you get a lot of offers, you get asked to contribute to things, and those asks don't always come with a budget, right? So if you're inviting people to speak on their expertise, whether it's lived experience or you know, academic professional experience, like make sure you're presenting value when you reach out to those people.
I mean, this is a capitalistic country, right? Like, if I look, as a consultant, I can look at your calendar and I can look at your checkbook and your budget and see what you really value, right? And these organizations oftentimes feel like they say to me stuff like, oh, you're one of the best people I've ever been taught to about this racial justice. You're one of the best. Okay, well, that needs to be reflected in my check, right? Pay me as if I was one of the best, right? Like, don't like, don't come to the car lot with Honda money expecting to leave with a Benz. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is for real. Like, and people wonder why specifically me, why, you know, it's like, well, wow, like Dar is great, but he's expensive. Well, do you want transformation or not? Because, you know, what I learned from my grandma, right, is the, you know, best things in life ain't free, right? Like, it's gonna cost. And anything worth having is worth paying for, right? Those are the things that I've learned. And, you know, when you pay for something, you take it seriously, right? And so you can do the book clubs. Those things are important, but if you really want transformation, it takes an investment, and it's not just your time, it's your money, and you need to have some level of goals, right? Like, I think oftentimes these folks are like, oh, well, I'm going to rewrite fragility, but then not apply it to your work, right? Like, that doesn't make sense. You know, you actually need to have a goal on what you're trying to transform. Why am I reading this book? Is it going to transform how I do this curriculum teaching in the classroom? If so, then that's why I need to take this, the goal, the frame, the lens in which I'm created. So yeah, sorry, yes. I can keep going, but you know.
I want to give a little space for Juanita if you have any final questions or comments before we move into our final round of reflections.
I basically was just enjoying everything everyone was saying, but my last kind of comment is still prioritizing radical rest, radical joy, and all that we do, because especially as facilitators, if we don't show up as our best selves or show up to hold that space, that's when we kind of lose the message of my work. Because if I'm tired, I had an injury one time and I couldn't show up to my classes, my message was missing. So now I am having these resting points and still not treating rest as if it's not productive.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I am always a fan of uplifting the ministry of deep rest. So thank you so much for highlighting that once more. And so now we have the opportunity to just kind of reflect on the conversation that we had. And so we'll each have, I'm going to give us like, if we can do like 30 seconds to answer one of these questions around what was most meaningful or valuable to you in this living room conversation, what learning, new understanding, or common ground was found on the topic, and how has this conversation changed your perception of anyone in this group, including yourself?
Wait, we gotta do that in 30 seconds?
Only one. You only answer one of those questions. It's only one of those questions. I'll kick us off, okay? Give you some time. So 30 seconds to answer only one of those questions, whichever speaks most to you. You know, one takeaway for me is, as someone who's representing Living Room Conversations, is we need to pay y'all. Like anytime we bring someone in for this, like everyone needs to get paid, period. And we've had a conversation about this before, but I'm going to really demand that be something that is, when we're calling people in, especially Black, Indigenous people of the global majority, to speak to these topics, we need to pay folks. And that's just that. That's a really big thing that I am holding myself accountable to, holding the organization accountable to.
I am not gonna I say, oh, you don't have to pay. We're like, no, I mean, if you want to. Common ground that I will say I found has just been in how all of us show up in slightly different ways or in slightly different fields, but how we show up and how we're aware that there's still an evolution and an unlearning from, the history that we taught or weren't taught as children up until our lived experiences now. And I think it's just amazing how, I'm hearing these commonalities across industry that we just as Black people in America hold. And so it's nice to know that that community exists, even if it looks different on the outside.
I want to say, and thank you for those comments. What was most meaningful, valuable to you in this living room conversation? I think what was most meaningful and valuable is just us even having this particular conversation. And I want to thank you, Brielle, for taking the leadership and saying, hey, this is needed. I know that is not always the most comfortable thing, especially in predominantly white spaces where there's no information about it, right? They may not know what this is all about and the purpose and the why. And for you to be courageous and speak up and say, hey, this is what is needed. And I know we're in a space and you're in a space that listening, the practice of listening is important, and opening and hearing different perspectives is important. And so I'm grateful for that as a partner with Living Room Conversation. I understand that. I also understand, though, the authenticity, if I can get the word out, that is required, and the courage that is required for that authenticity. And so I want to thank you personally for this, and everyone who's a part of this. I've enjoyed, just kind of hearing you, feeding off of you, and learning from each of you.
I'm speaking to the same question. What was the most meaningful, valuable to me with this conversation? As someone who doesn't have like a huge Black or Latino community around me, there's always community out there. Like I'm about to drive 3 hours on Saturday to celebrate Juneteenth with some amazing folk. And I think being able to be open to that, I'm like, oh, 3 hours, like I need it. I know that I crave that connection and it'll never be too far for me.
I wanted to say to Juanita, I am in Wilmington, North Carolina, so I'm close. I don't know if I'm close. I'm be honest. It could be like 5 hours to get to the other side of the state. You never know. But I think I'm gonna say what was the most meaningful and valuable part for me, which I'm thankful to you, Brielle, for staying on top of me, for bringing me to this space. But also, I think the recognition that folks need to be getting paid is something that is transformative for me right now. I believe that folks of color, we could be getting rich off of DEI work, right? Diversity, equity, inclusion work. The industry is $8 billion and growing as far as diversity consulting. And for us to not be tapped into that is, I think, a travesty and a disservice. And so I'm sending out as opportunities for anybody who is looking for coaching, for support, or for business help when they're trying to launch their diversity services product business. I want to be a person that can support you in that. And so at Doing the Good Work, you can follow me. But I want to make sure, again, it's not just about having a really good idea, but how does it fit into a market? How do you analyze a market to make sure that that market will want that product? How do you then understand your target customer. How do you understand your target customer's needs? I'm tired of getting Black folks having their grandma pass away, and then, you know, the cake recipe go with them, right? The pie recipe go with them, right? Like that is a multi-million-dollar idea probably right there that you allow to just go into the earth because we've been hustling. And we need to stop hustling. We need to start creating business structures that allow us to stop complaining about our people being unemployed and employ them ourselves, right? And that's, to me, empowerment. That's, to me, the change, and that's transformation that I'm trying to create in the community.
Yes. Thank you all so much for everything that has been shared. Really, really grateful for you all saying yes and showing up to this opportunity to share with this community a little bit more about Juneteenth and your own work and ways that you're showing up for racial justice to hopefully inspire other folks. And so, as a reminder, you can have this conversation in your community. And so someone shared throughout, you know, that I believe it was Dar, that you can have conversations within your community of other white folks if that's how you identify. And we actually have a conversation guide to help you do that. So we have a conversation guide specifically about being white in America and being white in the anti-racism movement. So you can download that guide and try that out, or you can pull from this PDF of various conversation questions about race and Juneteenth for you to explore in your communities. And so we encourage you to have a conversation about race in your community if you feel inspired. And we have plenty of resources to support you doing that on our website, from hosting best practices to we can give you a Zoom line if you need a Zoom line to actually have the conversation, and a number of other things that can all be found at livingroomconversations.org. You might have also heard some terms thrown around today that might have been new for you if you're just now leaning into the work around racial justice. We have a Talking About Race resource page, and we have some terms defined on there. So if some new language came out, like microaggressions, you're like, what's that? Go ahead, check that out. Go learn a couple new terms while you're at it. So thank you all so much for joining us for this conversation. And one other thing that you can also find on that Talking About Race resource page are recommended readings. And so reading is not the end all be all, but if you are called to learn some new things, all of the links in that reading list are directly linked to a Black-owned bookshop. So you can support a Black-owned bookshop when you are purchasing some of these books around racial justice. Have this conversation in your community. And please, if you feel inspired by this conversation, make a donation so we can pay our people, okay? Help support this work and help us support these amazing people who are supporting us in it as well. Thank you so much, and see you around next time.